Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The ZANU PF factional war is sucking all the oxygen in Zimbabwe. It is the only issue on the national agenda, and it has been literally impossible to talk of anything else. This is what is so tragic about Zimbabwe. The nation is desperately in need of addressing the teething problems of gross mismanagement, rampant corruption that have left the country impoverished. Nearly 50% of Zimbabweans today are living in abject poverty because of decades of gross mismanagement and misrule. And yet none of these issues can be addressed because ZANU PF, being a dictatorship, sets the agenda, the national agenda. ZANU PF rigged the 2023 elections. That's the starting point. So the regime is per se illegitimate. And yet soon after the 2023 elections, Mnangagwa launched his so-called ED 2030 bandwagon, where he was pushing that he should be allowed to stay in power until 2030, ostensibly to deliver Vision 2030. The truth of the matter is, you've just been elected. You've got a 5 years to serve. You haven't implemented any of your policies, and already you want an extension of it. This doesn't make any sense. But when you have got a regime that has got absolute power, they and they alone decide what the nation should discuss. So the nation had no choice but to be sucked into this ED 2030 debate. Well, the debate took a sudden turn in January when Blessed Geza and a few of his war veterans denounced the whole thing and called it bullshit. Here is a video clip of Geza denouncing the whole thing.
Are you against the 2030 slogan?
Yeah, I'm very much against. I think from my last interview, now that this is bullshit. You know? This is bullshit.
But you yes.
Fighters. One way up in the State House. But
you were two guys. Robert Kapio Mugabe was your guy.
Fuck off, man.
Mnangagwa was
When we say my war veterans, one way, I do that as I want. Yeah. One way, right? Our man nationalists, don't are my war veterans. You know?
What's the difference?
I'm not prepared to expand. Yeah.
Well, that explosion did take the steam out of the ED 2030 bandwagon. Everybody could see that Vision 2030 was just a mirage. Zimbabwe's economy was in a mess. Infrastructure everywhere was broken down. The country could not deliver even some of the basic services like education and health care. Or this whole idea that Mnangagwa should be allowed to stay on to deliver Vision 2030 was just nonsense. The party has taken its time to react to that. Initially, they tried to bribe the war veterans to stay in line. That has largely failed. And the most recent thing was to fire all the war veterans who had denounced ED 2030. And the next headlines is what surprised most people. Geza and company were fired yesterday. And here is Geza himself responding to that firing.
Please read my lips in case you miss my words. Look at my face. Do you see any fear? Do you think you can scare us? Bullshit. Some have been holding meetings to inject us from ZANU PF. Mashu. You think you can fire us from our party, which we brought with our own blood? Where were you? You were busy self scouting, right? Killing our comrades, killing our masses, right? This ZANU-PF is ours. It is you who will be living in the next few weeks. Mark my words. Watch this space. I want to tell you this here and now. We don't care. We are ready to face you head on.
Well, what is interesting is while Chinamasa was giving this interview announcing the firing of Geza and company, he was reporting on what the politburo, the ZANU PF politburo, had been talking about. Then the next thing, the headlines come out that the politburo had made plans to revive the ED for 2030. After all, Mnangagwa's public announcement that he had no intention of staying in power beyond 2028. I think this has taken many people by surprise. But to be quite honest, we should not be surprised at all. This is typical of ZANU PF, a dictatorship. Mnangagwa is desperate to stay in power by hook and by crook. And so he thought he would take the sting out of ED for 2030 after Geza and others had dismissed the whole idea as bullshit. By himself coming out and saying, no, I'm not, I'm a constitutionalist and I'm not going to stay in power beyond 2028. Meanwhile, he was taking a breather on how else can he silence Geza and others and then revive his drive to stay in power beyond 2030. George Charamba, the presidential spokesperson, dismissed the ED 2030 as dead and buried. The truth of the matter is that is not dead and buried until Mnangagwa himself is certified dead and buried. As long as he's still alive, he will try whatever methods he can to get back on track, to stay in power beyond 2030. Sorry, 2028. If he can change the constitution, amended, which he is proposing, it will be amended to allow the postponement of elections in 2028. The truth of the matter is, if he can postpone the elections from 2028 to 2030, he has amended the constitution to do so. Once the constitution has been amended, it's transferring power to Parliament. They will then decide when the elections should take place. If they can postpone them from 2028 to 2030, they can postpone them from 2028 to 2033, which is when the next elections would have been due. The worrying thing is this would have opened the Pandora's box for the nation. What should we do? Well, like I said at the beginning, we have a dictatorship. They set the national agenda. As much as people would have wanted to focus on other pressing economic and political issues, they have no choice. ZANU PF sets the national agenda, and at the present moment, ED 2030 is very much the big issue on the national agenda. And all we can do is, what can we do? My view is, if they are going to propose a constitutional amendment, this will have to be approved in a referendum. ZANU PF rigged the 2023 elections, as I said at the beginning of this discussion. SADC and the AU condemned the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. This is our starting point. We now have got to ask ourselves, if ZANU PF was able to rig the elections in 2023 as they did in 2018 and so forth, what is there to stop them rigging the referendum? Particularly as we can see the regime is not going to implement any meaningful democratic reforms to make sure that that referendum is free, fair, and credible. The solution, therefore, is that people should not participate in that referendum. I know it's easier said than done. The same argument was put to the nation not to participate in 2023 elections because ZANU PF was rigging those elections, and that participating will only give ZANU PF legitimacy, which is all equally true. But unfortunately, we had an opposition that they had their own agenda. They wanted to participate because they knew that those who participate will win the few gravy train seats that ZANU PF is offering to the opposition to entice them to participate. I think after the 2023 elections, the situation is considerably different. SADC have condemned the 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. I think that gives the people even greater mileage in claiming that we are not going to keep on participating in a flawed and illegal process. The challenge here is to persuade those opposition supporters to see sense. That, I will be the first one to admit, is easier said than done, because we know the opposition supporters are a very naive and gullible lot. Last time, Chamisa told them that Triple C was going to win big because he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Of course, he was lying. But that doesn't matter. What mattered is they believed him. I think come 2028, or whenever the referendum is to be held, the opposition would want to participate for the sake of getting those few gravy train seats. And their supporters are so naive and gullible, they'll be conned into participating. It must be emphasized here that if you participate, you give the process legitimacy. That is a fact. So we have got a difficult way ahead. Stopping this ZANU PF dictatorship is not going to be a walk in the park, but it can be done. Think about it. Thank you very much, those of you who were able to join us tonight. Have a good night.